It showed up around Labor Day weekend, a little early for Halloween decorations in my opinion, but then again I've never really been one to decorate for holidays, so what do I know? My husband and I first noticed the skeleton just before school started back up. He was dressed up in khaki shorts, a polo shirt, a baseball cap, and a backpack, and stood against a telephone pole near the bus stop. A little skeleton dog sat at his feet, appearing to see him off to his first day of school. A few days later the skeleton had been moved. He sat under the large tree in the neighbor's front yard holding a garden hose in his hand. Over the next week he moved around the yard every day, sometimes checking the mail and sometimes working under the hood of the neighbor's truck. My dogs liked to bark at him every time we went for a walk. It was slightly amusing and slightly annoying to try to explain to the dogs every time that it wasn't a real human and to stop with the barking. My husband and I finally met the neighbor about 2 weeks ago. We've only been living in our house for 3 months and had only seen the neighbor in passing as we headed out to walk the dogs or go on a date night. We learned that he was retired, divorced, and had 2 adult children. We made small talk for a few minutes, and just as we were about to head inside, my husband mentioned the skeleton. By the way, we noticed the skeleton. We are always interested to see where he has moved to every day, my husband told him as I nodded along in agreement. The neighbor glanced over his shoulder at the skeleton and lowered his voice a little. "Oh, you've noticed him move?" he asked, glancing at the skeleton again. I nodded again. "Yeah, it's pretty cute, and I'm sure the kids enjoy it too." Our neighbor didn't respond to that. Just stared at us silently for a moment before telling us he should let us get back to our day and making his way across the yard and into his house. I watched him walk away, slightly confused at his sudden change in demeanor. It almost seemed like he was afraid of his own Halloween decoration. "Weird Jude," I said to my husband, who looked equally confused. The next morning the skeleton had moved again. This time he was standing under the speed limit sign, pointing upward with one hand, with the other hand extended outward in front of him in an almost exasperated fashion. I pointed it out to my husband as we walked the dogs. "Look, he's enforcing the speed limit." I chuckled. I had to admit that he had a point. Even though the road was lined with houses, school bus stops, churches, and even a daycare center, people still flew down the street at speeds clearly much higher than the posted speed limit of 35. That night I woke to flashing blue and red lights outside the house. I'm an EMT/firefighter myself, so I decided to go outside and see what my colleagues were responding to. I was greeted by the sight of a pretty horrific accident. A sleek Camaro convertible was lying upside down in the middle of the road. The soft top completely obliterated and shattered glass glittering in the flashing lights. A fellow firefighter noticed me walking across my yard and approached me. "Lawrence," I said, nodding to him, "what the hell happened?" He shook his head. "We aren't really sure. It looks like the guy was speeding and lost control of his car, but we really have no idea how he flipped it." I couldn't take my eyes off of the beaten-up Camaro in the street. "How's the driver?" Again Lawrence shook his head. "He's a doer. The convertible too wouldn't have provided much protection even if he had been wearing a seatbelt." The next morning I noticed that the skeleton had moved again. This time he was pointing at the side mirror of the Camaro, which was still lying at the side of the road. His head was cocked back and his mouth was open, almost as if he was laughing at the demise of the driver from the previous night. As a first responder, the new positioning of skeleton didn't really sit well with me. I was upset that the neighbor could find someone's death to be humorous, so I decided to reposition the skeleton myself. I marched across the yard and pushed the skeleton's arms down to his side, then turned his head so he was looking up toward the neighbor's house. I then picked up the mirror and carried it to my dumpster. Small pieces get left behind at accident scenes all the time, so I knew nobody would be back for it, and I didn't want the neighbor making it into a joke again. I was still annoyed after I tossed the mirror in the trash and glared soothingly at the skeleton. It was no longer a cute Halloween decoration to me. It was also no longer looking at the neighbor's house. I froze, staring at it in disbelief. Not 90 seconds ago I had positioned its head to be looking at the neighbor's house, and now it was looking over its shoulder, looking directly at me. I decided I must have just moved it in such a way that the head wouldn't stay in place, because there was no way that thing moved on its own. The following day I came home from my 24-hour shift at the fire station and noticed that the skeleton was standing against the tree in the neighbor's yard again, but this time he was on the side closest to our house, looking at my parking spot in the driveway. I figured the neighbor put him there because he was upset that I had repositioned him the day before, but it still felt a little off to me. I shook my head and went inside, trying to forget about it. This morning when my husband and I took the dogs out, the skeleton was in our driveway, leaning against my car and staring at our bedroom window. I was beyond annoyed at this point. "Okay," I said to my husband, trying very hard to control my temper. "I'm about to go next door and have a talk with that guy. This is getting ridiculous." My husband was not having it. "Don't do that," he told me. "He's a little weird, but he's harmless." I glanced at the skeleton and then back to my husband. "No, this is annoying. If you think I'll be too much of a bitch, then you go talk to him. You're nicer than me." But this stops today one way or another. In the end, my husband agreed to speak with the neighbor, and we continued with our morning walk. We take the dogs for short walks in the morning, so we were only gone for roughly 20 minutes. But when we came back, the skeleton was at the bottom of the porch steps, still looking at the bedroom window. My husband could sense my rage building, and before I could say anything, he assured me that he would talk to the neighbor right after we got the dogs fed. He kept his word and went next door the second we filled the dog bowls, but he returned way too soon. "He's not him," he told me, flopping down on the couch next to me. I was beyond pissed at this point. His truck is outside. I practically screeched. He's just not answering the door. I'm going to have some strong words for him next time I see him. I never did see the neighbor, but I woke up about 39 minutes ago to a weird scratching noise coming from my bedroom window. The sound hasn't woken my husband yet, and I'm too afraid to move or make a noise, because framed in the window I can see the distinct silhouette of a skeleton running its bony fingers up and down the glass.